everybody. This is Stacey McStationary, and this is Radio Stationary, the podcast. Since it's our first episode, I thought it would be fit to start with the ABCs of Flat Earth. And in the ABCs, A is for Antarctica, B is for ball. Why is it a ball? And C is for controlled opposition. I have the perfect person to talk about controlled opposition. He's been studying these issues for a number of years. He has been a truther for 20 years. He's been aware of the deception and that most media is fake. He has been a flat earther for 5 years. He hates liars because he loves the truth. He is a truth seeker and a truth finder. So this morning, joining me, I have the one and only Civilian X. Good morning, Civ.
Hello, good morning.
Hey, thanks for coming on our podcast.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. That was great.
You're very welcome. I'm very glad to have you, and I'm excited about this podcast. It's my first one. So let's just jump right in. A is for Antarctica, and a lot of shape of Earth discussion ends up being about Antarctica because they told us it is a continent down at the bottom of the globe. But when some of us look into it, we see that it's not that. So what can you tell us about Antarctica, Civ?
Well, I think first I'd like to address the misconception that we can travel to Antarctica freely and unabated.
Yep.
And that is simply not true.
What's stopping us from just getting in a boat and going to Antarctica?
Let's first look at the vacation trips to Antarctica.
Okay.
And then we'll go into some rules and regulations about traveling. So first of all, the majority of people that travel to so-called Antarctica for a vacation, they go to where the penguins are located,
right? Which
is called Fort Lacray, and that is actually an island that is not even connected to the so-called mainland of Antarctica.
Okay.
And the second most popular destination is a place called Falkland Islands, and that is a chain of islands that is considered Antarctica. However, it is actually located more north than the southernmost tip of South America.
Wow.
So the most traveled areas to Antarctica are actually both islands that are not even part of the so-called mainland portion of Antarctica.
Okay, so hold on. People, when they go on their luxury cruise to so-called Antarctica, they're actually visiting the islands where the penguins live. They're not hitting Antarctica. Okay.
Right, correct.
Interesting. Okay.
And speaking of traveling, as far as being a tourist, there's only one single private company in the world that offers a plane trip into the interior of Antarctica. And the name of that company, for anybody that wants to research it, is called White Desert, and it is out of London, UK. And a few notes on that I found interesting myself is that the price of that trip for each person is $84,000.
Nice.
And there's a 25% fee due up front, and the remaining balance is due 6 months prior to the trip's date.
Okay.
The CEO of that company, his name is Patrick Woodhead, and he has a book titled Beneath the Ice. And it's a science fiction book about a guy that's been hired by M16 to lead a team of scientists 2 miles beneath the surface of Antarctica to discover some secret. And of course, M16 is the British equivalent to our CIA, and their official name is the Secret Intelligence Service, and their motto is Semper Occultus, which means always secret.
Wow, always hidden. Interesting.
And in correlation, we have the Admiral Byrd's account of going to so-called Antarctica. So in the 90s, somebody decided to write a book that they claim was based off of Admiral Byrd's diary, and he was directed in by aliens into the center of the Earth.
Wow, okay, hang on. Let's stop for a second and talk about Admiral Byrd, because people bring that up a lot. So, total hoax or what, Civ?
I believe so, yes. He may have led an expedition at some point there with planes.
Yeah.
However, I don't believe any of the official stories or accounts that the government has given us or this book that was written in the 90s about his diary.
Okay, so the diary, supposedly his diary was coming up in the 90s.
Right, somebody found it and decided to write a book about it. Well,
Okay.
after his death, obviously.
Okay.
And then that has perpetuated the theory of hollow earth.
Interesting. Okay. Now, backing up a little bit, back to Antarctica and the exploration thereof. Let's just say somebody, normal Joe citizen, wants to go down to Antarctica, check it out. What exactly do they have to do in order to go visit Antarctica?
Okay, well, that's rather lengthy, and I obviously have a lot of notes on that, so I may jump around. But
Okay.
let's discuss if you want to fly there. Okay, so whether or not you own your own plane or you can hire someone who has a plane, but we'll discuss flying there. That's practically nearly impossible. So I'll at least say that and admit that no, nothing's impossible. However, most people do not understand just how much regulations are involved with traveling to Antarctica or probably traveling outside of their country in general. So just some real quick rules as far as flying that people will say, why don't we just fly there? Well, number one, you have what's called CFR 14.
Okay.
And CFR 14 is specifically discussing the Federal Aviation Regulations. So it's all about the FFA and what you must do. Most people already know that if you want to fly a plane, particularly at a certain altitude, you have to do a flight path, stuff like that. That's actually least important. The most important thing is these particular rules concerning Antarctica. If you want to fly a plane to Antarctica, if it's a single-engine plane, you must at all times be no more than 80 miles from an airport.
Huh.
And if it's a double-engine airplane, you cannot be any more than 160 miles from an airport.
Okay.
So we could just begin there. Now, and beyond that as well, there's other things as far as let me look at my notes just so I'll get this right.
Okay, so while you're looking, let me just jump in for a second. That means it's pretty much prohibited to go into these remote areas because once you do, you're 80 miles from an airport or you're 160 miles from an airport. So right there, you can't just go exploring in these remote areas where there aren't any airports. It's not allowed.
Yes, correct. And they're going to say, for safety reasons, obviously, that you need to be able to make it to an airport. I would assume instead of so-called crashing your plane into Antarctica, causing an environmental catastrophe.
Right.
So with all of this, at the very least, you would need to do massive research. And we haven't even got into what you actually have to do. But you basically have to do massive research before you would even begin to plan an expedition to Antarctica.
Okay.
So it is next to near impossible, particularly with all of these demands. So within what's called the Antarctic Conservation Act, these are just a few rules that you have to follow if you're even planning going to Antarctica. And if you are to break any of these rules, then that's a $28,000 fine and a year imprisonment.
Whoa.
So that alone right there would be enough to deter people to even try and going down there because here's ways that you would violate the Antarctic Conservation Act.
Okay.
And these are all completely ridiculous. And I'm giving sub-notes, however, anybody can look this up, obviously. But one note is that you cannot damage plants by walking.
Okay. Okay.
All right. No motorized vehicles whatsoever.
In all of Antarctica?
Correct.
Okay.
Unless you are a government-run or government-funded scientific research. This is all about if you want to go Antarctica and explore Antarctica on your own.
Wow, so it's sled dogs only.
No, the next one is no dogs allowed.
Oh, no. And how would you even get them there in the first place?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Now, and yes, and then we'll get into boating in a second.
Okay,
And so taking a plane there is, in my opinion, completely off because, number one, you'd have to go to visit multiple airports, refuel, and all that. So we haven't even gotten into the cost of it.
Okay.
So that's another thing. People say, why don't flat earthers just go find the edge? Well, none of this is that simple whatsoever. We don't even believe what they say, much less how could we even travel there without even knowing anything. We wouldn't even know where we're traveling or when we should get to the so-called ice wall.
Right.
And another one, this is the last one that I'm going to mention when it comes to the Antarctic Conservation Act, which is the most ridiculous at all. Not only do you have to carry your own excrement with you as you're traveling through Antarctica, you have to get a permit for it.
Oh, snap. That makes it difficult.
Yes, correct. Absolutely ridiculous rules to so-called travel to Antarctica.
Okay, so let's go back to boating for a second, because I think you were telling me once about the different things you have to do if you want to sail to Antarctica.
Yes, correct. Right. Well, let's go back to basic. The Antarctic Treaty, for instance.
Okay.
Within the Antarctic Treaty and within what's called the Protocol on Environmental Protection to the Antarctic Treaty, this treaty obliges each party to give advance notification of all expeditions to and within Antarctica.
Okay.
So that is number one, and I believe, as a matter of fact, that's in what's called Article 7, Paragraph 5, is where it specifically mentions that each party of the Antarctic Treaty has to let the other party know. So that's number one there to understand. Now, within that, in bold letters, and I have a screenshot here I'm looking at from the U.S. State Department, and this is the website called travel.state.gov, and it says in bold letters here, all U.S. nationals organizing private expeditions to Antarctica in the United States or proceeding to Antarctica from the United States are required to provide notification to the State Department at least 3 months prior to the intended travel to the Antarctic Treaty area. So specifically, it states on the government website, yet again, that yes, you have to give advance notice. Now, what's that basically saying is, let's say that someone from Canada wants to take their boat to Antarctica. Well, you have to refuel at some point. So let's just say you have to refuel somewhere in America or United States. Well, you have to give the United States 3 months prior notice to letting them know where you're planning on going to there from United States. And of course, that's just one simple regulation from the very beginning.
So it's not like you're just going on vacation. It's not like you're just flying to France for a couple of weeks. You don't have to let anybody know about that. You just get your passport and you go. This thing you're talking about is a whole different thing. Like, you have to inform them months in advance, and it's probably not just a matter of informing, it's probably a matter of getting their permission.
Yes, correct. You have to fill out a form, and that form that you fill out is called the Advance Notification Form, and I've got the code written down in case anybody wants to look it up. It's DS4131. And within that form, the important part about it is that you're going to have to give them what's called an environmental impact assessment statement. And the cost of that can be anywhere between $250,000 and $2 million. So that one there pretty much puts any expedition from America, and other countries have their own rules as well, and I'll go in a little bit deeper with that, but yes, that pretty much puts any trip to Antarctica dead in the water right there, because the cost of the money alone for the environmental impact statement.
That's telling me that Joe Citizen cannot go to Antarctica.
No, and that's the thing is, too, when you fill out this and you tell them the reason why you want to go to Antarctica, well, you certainly aren't going to tell them you want to go prove the Earth is flat.
That's right. You're looking for the edge. You can't tell them that.
And it's going to have to be for scientific reasons. There's going to have to be a so-called scientific benefit to why you want to go to Antarctica to get it approved. Now, even if your country of origin approves it, and that's a huge if, all the other countries that have signed the treaty have to also approve it, which is even a bigger hurdle. Now, there's a lot more in between there about ifs, and you actually mentioned traveling. Well, let's say just boating or sailing, as we'll call it. If you plan to leave your country of origin, and particularly in the U.S., it's 15 miles, you're now in international waters. If you plan to leave international waters, you have to let your country of origin know, and they usually want you to do it within 2 days, 2 days prior to leaving.
Okay.
You have to let them know where you're going, and you have to let them know when you're coming back. And that's true for most countries. If you were wanting to travel by boat to Antarctica and you constantly need to refuel, you'll need to know exactly what ports you're going into to refuel, and you'll have to keep a log Matter of fact, it's actually called clearance papers. You have to have clearance papers for every port that you leave or every country that you leave.
So you have to know in advance where you're going to stop, and you have to tell them that you're stopping there.
Yes, you have to be what would be considered a world-class sailor before you would even begin planning an expedition to Antarctica. And that's even if you got the permission to go to Antarctica. Now, more importantly, and it's just speaking of the United States on this, the United States does not even claim any territory in Antarctica. So you're going to have to get permission from the countries that do claim territory in Antarctica.
But who knows how that process would go?
Yeah, of course. And another thing about that I'd like to bring up, okay, so within the Antarctic Conservation Act also, there's actually specific areas that you cannot travel to. You're not allowed to go there at all.
So they're just off limits. It's just not legal to go there.
Yeah, correct, right. And the only way is that if it's a governmental scientific expedition.
Well, with the parameters that you're describing, it sounds like only the government can do an expedition to Antarctica.
Correct, absolutely. Unabated and without restriction and regulation. However, yes, under their own treaty, they get permission from these other countries to do it, which is exactly why the travel companies, they already have ongoing contract with the country of origin they leave. So this is already, I guess you'd say, already approved. They approve these each year. So people could, argue and say, well, people travel to Antarctica. Well, number one, no, they're not going to Antarctica. They're going to islands that are supposedly near Antarctica. And number two, that, yes, they're doing what they have to do per their country of origin to be able to make these trips to Antarctica, because the Antarctic Treaty actually covers, if I'm not mistaken, it's 90 degrees. It's 60 degrees. 60 degrees. And the measurement on that is 7.7 million square miles. At least what they tell us. There's 7.7 million square miles on this earth that we, as regular citizens, are just not allowed to travel freely to and explore.
Interesting.
And we've just shown that you have to do it on foot. If you were to even make it to so-called Antarctica on a boat, you have to trek the rest of the distance on foot. Now, if we wanted to prove Antarctica was a continent, basically the average distance there and back would be 6,000 miles.
Wow.
And you have to do all that on foot, bringing all your gear with you, and you would never make it, even that alone.
It just sounds impossible.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you'd need some type of private submarine or something and hope they don't see you going there. That's realistically the only way to possibly even attempt a so-called expedition to Antarctica. You're not going to get permission to go there.
Okay, well then let me ask you this, because I've heard people ask this question a lot online, which is, who patrols the border and who keeps you from entering? Let's say you were somehow to get there. People make the argument of the coastline is too long, it's impossible for them to patrol. So, Siv, what do you say to that?
Well, obviously, the whole idea that that's too big of a coastline for them to patrol, that is obviously just a weak argument. Because, first of all, there's only a couple of places that are so-called close to that, which is the southernmost tip of South America and the southernmost tip of Africa.
Right.
So, speaking of that, yeah, I found this one day myself just looking around, and this is from the Royal Navy's official website, and they have an entire division called the Antarctic Patrol. So it's on their website, you can look it up, and it's stated in that website that the Navy's ice patrol ship's role is to provide a sovereign and reassuring presence in the United Kingdom's largest overseas territory, which is the British Antarctic Territory.
Interesting that that's the largest one.
Yeah, exactly. The largest overseas territory they own is Antarctica. And so I think it's 7 countries out of the 7 countries that do stake a claim in Antarctica. UK is one of them.
And didn't you tell me one's India also?
Yeah, India has an official Antarctic Patrol division as well. And there's other countries too.
And it's an answer to the argument when people say no one patrols Antarctica or who could patrol Antarctica. Well, they do. And if you look on these government websites, you'll see that they do. They have a division devoted to patrolling Antarctica.
Absolutely. Correct. And people can make of it what they will. However, it's a big misconception that most people say, and quite frankly, yes, they use it to so-called make fun of flat earthers, because they just say these things like, "Oh, they're waiting for anybody to come there to kill us," you know. But
Right.
how many people are just trying to travel to Antarctica? And so they also use the claim, "Show me anybody who's been stopped going there." Well, no one in their right mind who knows anything about traveling would even attempt to go there. So no, that hasn't happened yet.
Right. No, we don't have an incident that we can point to, but it's because those incidents are prevented.
Yes, and speaking of that, I think this is important too. I tell people this a lot, that even if you're in the United States and you want to take a jet ski from Florida to the Bahamas, you can see plenty of videos of people on YouTube that have been stopped by the Coast Guard for just traveling that short of a distance. So that's the easiest way to say it. If you haven't let your country of origin know that you're leaving, yeah, you're more than likely going to get stopped. They do patrol their own borders themselves, so that's another thing there. Back to the permission. So yes, no one's just going to go to Antarctica. That's not ever going to happen.
Okay. Well, I want to switch gears a little bit, unless you have more to say to Antarctica topic.
I think that's pretty much it. There's the last thing I'd like to say about that. I think
that's
important as well. And both North Korea and Russia are members of the Antarctic Treaty. If that doesn't show collusion, then I don't know what else does.
I always say Antarctica is the proof of the staged world. If you can't see that, I don't know what else to show you, because these nations that are supposedly enemies all agree about one thing, and that's Antarctica. And no matter if they're at war with one another, no matter the Cold War, it doesn't matter. Antarctica is the treaty that is never violated. And we talk about it a lot, but then very few people have actually looked into it to see what it says. But you've done that, haven't you?
Absolutely. Word for word. I've read the Antarctic Treaty myself.
So Russia is there, North Korea is there. Just to back up a little bit, in case somebody is brand new to Flat Earth, Antarctica is not what they told us. It's not a continent at the bottom of a spinning ball. It is, as far as we know, now as we just stated, we haven't been there to see it with our own eyes, because that's restricted, but as far as we know, it is a wall of ice that extends all the way around our realm in a circle. And let me qualify that by saying, as far as I know. I've seen pictures of it. Did I take those pictures myself? No, because I'm not able to go there. But they told us that Antarctica is a continent at the bottom of a spinning ball, and it's clearly not. There's a lot of indoctrination that has to do with Antarctica. I could go on a little bit about that. They definitely hit small children, third graders, with this idea that Antarctica, the coldest place on Earth. They really want everybody knowing the narrative about Antarctica. Did you want to add anything to that, Siv?
I think one thought-provoking fact is that whether Antarctica is an island or whether it is an ice wall that surrounds us, one fact is that no matter where you are on this Earth, if you start traveling south, you will encounter walls of ice.
Okay. I've read some of the captain's logs from the expeditions of the 1800s, and certainly it was formidable sailing even for people who were those world-class sailors. Once you get into the very southern latitudes, it's very icy, and at a certain point they just had to turn left and start heading up and over to Australia because it was too dangerous. Too many icebergs, too much ice in the water, right? So, okay, that's pretty much all I have about Antarctica, except for one side note. I had a troll at one point post this screenshot from a website where they supposedly do a race around Antarctica every year. And I looked into it. The whole thing is fake. The website itself has an email address of a person you can contact if you want to be part of this race that they do every year around Antarctica. So I contact the guy, the email bounces back. It's a fake race, fake email. The only evidence they had was this one explorer who does a lot of sailing, and supposedly he did it, but you could circumnavigate similar to Magellan's route and just make a circle around the continents. It would take you ages. I suppose you could do it, but that's what we mean when we talk about circumnavigation. There is no north-south circumnavigation.
Correct. Absolutely not.
So
And no footage of a plane flying over Antarctica, no footage of a plane keeping up with the sun for 24 hours either on the ball, any of that.
So all of that is fake. When anybody mentions something about that, that's a hoax, right?
Well, obviously, if Antarctica was an island, yes, it's plausible. However, it's not as if that they would be sailing around Antarctica and they can see the so-called coastline the entire time.
Yeah.
So, no, that's impossible. So, therefore, how would they know exactly that they're sailing around so-called Antarctica?
Right.
But no, I don't even find that very believable. That's a huge. If you were going to go around Antarctica, supposedly, that's just thousands and thousands of miles. I don't see that being legitimate.
Yeah, and it did take 3 years to do it in the 1800s. Now, they took their time. It wasn't direct sailing the whole entire time, but the point is, yeah, it's a very long trip. Okay, so I want to switch gears a little bit. A is for Antarctica. B is for ball. So I want to press pause for just a second and get ready for the B segment of today's show. All right, welcome back, everybody. This is Stacey, and we're starting the second segment of our first podcast. A is for Antarctica. B is for ball. They told us that we're living on a ball. And when we looked into it a little bit more, we found out that there's no evidence that we're on a ball. It seems more like we are on a stationary plane. One of the things that people like to post online is a close-up picture of a tennis ball. And they say, look, it looks straight when you zoom in on it. And then you realize that it's a sphere. Only one problem with that. A tennis ball does not have thousands of square kilometers of ocean. Oceans are flat and level, and they don't exist on tennis balls or basketballs. Civilian X, what do you have to say to us today about the ball?
Well, the ball doesn't exist. That's as simple as that. But no curvature has been observed by anybody. Nobody I know of, and not by myself.
At any altitude?
Absolutely. Whether standing on a beach or in a hot air balloon or on a plane, the horizon is always eye level. I don't see how anybody can possibly attempt to get out of that one, but they do.
Okay.
You know, we talk a lot about the shape of the Earth and flat Earth. For me, the most important thing is, you know, we're not on a ball flying through space. That's number one.
Right.
For me, it's as simple as looking at the sun. You have to supposed to imagine yourself flying around that object at 66,000 miles an hour every day.
Right.
That's just completely ludicrous. The sun's not 93 million miles away, and we're not rotating or going around it. And a lot of people always ask, obviously, so what is the shape of the Earth? Well, we don't know, and I would say for the majority of most flat earthers, nor do we honestly really care.
We don't have a working model necessarily. We just know that we're not on a spinning ball.
Sure, absolutely. I would say, and opponents would say, you know, if you don't have a working model, how do you know you're not on a ball? And the simple answer to that is there is no evidence for the ball. Therefore, we know we're not on a ball.
Right. There's nothing to support it. Okay, so A is for Antarctica, B is for ball, C is for controlled opposition. One of the most difficult things to explain to new people or the uninitiated is what is controlled opposition. When I'm trying to explain flat Earth to people who don't believe it or don't understand it, I try to tell them that there's bad people that infiltrate, and that just makes no sense to them at all. But somebody who's done a lot of research with it and has a lot of experience with it is our guest, Civilian X. So, Civ, how would you explain controlled opposition?
Well, in my opinion, controlled opposition is probably one of the biggest challenges that we have, mainly because the controlled opposition is actually reaching the masses more than we are.
Okay.
So if you consider that mainstream media of all kinds, you know, we had already agreed we weren't going to mention names, and I think we'll just leave it at that, mainstream media. For now, we won't even mention exact media outlets that do it.
Okay.
But everybody should know that they do these hit pieces on flat earthers, and quite frankly, they make them look silly, and they don't show any evidence They simply just show them talking on the screen. That's just a little part of it. So anybody who would even consider looking into flat Earth has already had their mind made up because they've seen some hit piece making flat earthers look ridiculous.
Okay, so they come into it with an idea that it's silly and the only people who believe it are uneducated, and you say that's intentional.
Yeah, absolutely. And another part of that is if people really notice when they're interviewing some of these so-called flat earthers, the first thing they ask them is they actually insinuate. And sometimes they ask, but a lot of times they insinuate and they say, well, you started this being a conspiracy theorist.
Mm.
So anytime flat earth is mentioned in the mainstream media, they have to throw in the word conspiracy theorist.
Okay. Right, and that's to control people's idea of who a flat earther is, what the flat earth movement is all about, has to do with conspiracy theory, right?
Yes, correct, because obviously everybody has to be lying and so-called in on it. And that's where that cognitive dissonance comes from, because people can't fathom that they could get so much collusion from these countries to be able to so-called fake space and hide the fact that we're not on a ball.
Okay, so if they can put it in the category of conspiracy theory, then it makes it easy for people to dismiss it.
Instantly, without ever even looking into it.
Okay, so they consider the possibility that all the nations of the world could be in on some big conspiracy, and they think, well, that's not possible. And so then they dismiss it, and then that's it.
Right, and the majority of the people sitting around at home who watch just normal television and believe everything that they see and hear and read, and flat earth never even crossed their mind.
Right.
The mainstream media put that into their face to already show them that it's ludicrous, such as doing a discovery show, using a laser to prove the earth is round at only 3 miles, and narrated by Stephen Hawking, the fake computer voice. It's huge money. If anybody understands how corporate television works, especially in America, that's billions of dollars. So they're using huge money to put these things on television out to the public. There again, and I guarantee you, my numbers would probably tell me 95% of the public has never even sat around and thought about, is the earth flat or round?
Right.
Thus have never done their own research. The media, the corporate media, has created this storm. So that's rule number one to understand. They put this out. They were doing damage control back in 2012, at least as far as I remember, on flat earth. A lot of people will say flat earth is a psyop. It's not that flat earth is a psyop. It's that the mainstream media and the people who control it have had to control the narrative since day one. They knew the information would get out by itself. Thus, they've had to control the narrative.
Okay, Siv, say a little bit about 2012. What was going on that flat earth started to be available on the internet?
Okay, basically it was the whole thing about Planet X and the end of the world and the Mayan calendar and all of that, okay?
Okay.
Same way with that, leading up to that, Discovery Channel and Science Channel and stuff like that were doing pieces on that as well. And, they would title it, is the end of the world coming? And they would mimic the same so-called conspiracies that are online about it. Now, during that time, that's when, just like 9/11, it took them a while to figure out that the videos were fake. And I guess at some point, people moved on beyond the moon landing and started looking at the ISS. So just like me, for instance, I've known the moon landings were fake for maybe 15, 20 years. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I never would have thought they were faking every bit of the ISS. So that kind of information, I think they knew that was going to get out more and more, and you can't stop that. So people have to look at that ISS footage, and they know that it's completely fake. And NASA, nor anybody else, has any reasonable explanation to explain why NASA would fake not just a little bit of their footage, but every single bit of footage they've ever put out.
So it was worse than we thought. Some people knew that the moon landing was fake, but then come to find out the whole thing is fake. It's all fake.
Absolutely.
Okay, so in 2012, they started doing damage control because some of this stuff started coming out, and not just 9/11, but also ISS, the end of the world, things like that.
Yeah, correct. Right.
Okay.
And of course, as we saw, nothing happened with 2012 and all of that. So.
Right.
And you have to ask yourself also, where does that information come from? Who originally creates those kind of theories that, you know, 1 million videos on 2012, the end of the Earth. Just like now, there's 1 million videos about Hollow Earth.
Okay.
And as we mentioned before, we know where the theory of Hollow Earth came from. So that's completely made up. And that's made up not by just some YouTuber sitting around and it gets spread. And we should investigate the author of that book, to be honest. But essentially it comes down to the publishing company. Who is it that published that so-called book of Alan Bird and began pushing that?
Right. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the end game. I'm kind of jumping to the end a little bit because it makes me think of the alien deception. And this has a little bit to do touching on 2012 and controlled opposition. Can you say a little bit about the alien hoax and the alien deception and what you believe the end goal is for the controlled opposition regarding aliens?
Well, that is such a broad topic, but as brief as I can, at least what I believe is going on, that it's I call it the long game.
Okay.
I think we're quite a ways from that. I don't even believe that most of us will probably see it. That's just my personal opinion.
Okay.
I think that may come in a way of virtual reality. At that time, perhaps 50, even 100 years, nobody's going to know what to believe.
Okay.
So I think that, yeah, there again, that's the short answer. We're quite a ways from that happening.
Okay, and when you say that, you're talking about maybe Project Bluebeam or maybe the fake alien invasion, something like this?
Yeah, well, what I would call it at this point, I used to call it the alien invasion because I can envision them acting like that aliens invade. And I've had a theory that they'll use drones because in the event that we are able to shoot one or some down, then there won't be an alien inside, and they'll say they're being controlled by the mothership out in outer space, right?
Oh, okay.
So that's one theory, that they will invade, obviously. The other theory is that it'll just be what we can call an encounter. So what I can say is that they're already pushing the narrative that aliens are among us. They've already named these 13 races of aliens, and there's good and there's bad aliens, and they want you to believe, basically, that we are protecting aliens at the moment from other aliens in space. And even they want you to believe that we're currently fighting other aliens and spaceships in space without our knowledge.
Wow.
And of course, if they told you that aliens did exist and they know of it, they say that everybody would be hysterical and it'd be pandemonium. However, I think today, especially in America, and you look at the amount of videos there are online about aliens, I think most people believe in aliens. So that theory's out the window there, that they can't tell the public about this because they'll riot or something, you know.
And why do most people believe in aliens? Because of indoctrination, because of movies and TV. It's constantly pushed. Aliens.
Yeah, all the time. And in such subtle ways, people don't even realize that, in my opinion. But yes, it's constantly. If you ask anybody to draw an alien, most people are going to draw the exact same type of image with the big black eyes and all of that and skinny neck.
Sure. Okay. So the end game has to do with an encounter. Is there anything else you want to say regarding controlled opposition and how it affects truthers?
I've been pretty vocal about it.
Okay.
And I've started not being quite as vocal. However, I think it's important as a truther myself, though, to call out blatant lies and blatant deception. So, and part of that controlled opposition is designed that way to create factions, to create discord among the community, even to the point to where, because someone posts a video from what someone like me would call a known shill, then we don't respect that person or even think they may be a shill.
Right.
So, yes, the controlled opposition goes a lot deeper than just only to the masses. It's for us as well, so that we argue about that, who's a shill and who's not. I think I'd just like to say this, the one thing about that. The easiest way to mitigate that, because people have asked me many times, well, who do you recommend? And I always tell them, well, I recommend you. You make your own video and content.
Yes.
Why do we have to direct people to videos on YouTube made by other people? I direct them to government websites, official websites. That's where the official narrative and the official word is. So that's the best I can say for now, and still be respectful to the entire community, because honestly, it really is a problem pushing particular ideals out here that make flat Earth look absolutely ridiculous.
Okay, so your recommendation would be become a content creator. Create your own Twitter, your own videos, because that way you can trust the source.
Yes, correct. Right. Absolutely. Okay. And when it comes to that, it's good to share your experience. It's good to share your epiphanies. So when you're sitting around every day yourself and you're like, you know what, that just doesn't make sense, or you find fakery yourself, it's stuff like that I personally would be sharing with other people.
Right. Right. I think you've mentioned that to me before. When it's personal and authentic, it's meaningful, regardless of whether someone else has said it before or not.
Yes, correct. And it is true. We all know, yes, it is true. A YouTube channel doesn't prove anything. Now, obviously, there's plenty of videos and entire channels that show a lot of good information, but still, I think it's wise that everybody creates their own content, particularly just to show their family and friends and themselves.
Sure, and that is going to touch on a topic that I think is near and dear to your heart, which is activism and experiments rather than just talking. So hopefully you'll agree to be on the podcast at another time. We can talk more about that.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I would love to.
Okay, so just to summarize a little bit what we've talked about today, A is for Antarctica. Can you go there? Not without...
I don't believe that.
I don't either. Not without $2 million. B is for the ball. C is controlled opposition. And I'm hoping to cover D, E, and F in the next podcast. Meanwhile, this has been Radio Stationary Podcast with Stacey and Civilian X. Thank you very much for listening. And Civ, I appreciate you very much being part of this. Is there anything else you want to say before we say goodbye?
That's it, I guess, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate you. And we're going to sign off. So goodbye, everybody. Thanks again for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode.